Well, welcome everyone. Welcome to this is an exciting evening for us, not the least of which reason is that we have our friend Holly Northam with us and that we can gather together with all of you. But this is the first lecture in a series of, in a lecture series related to the Restorative Lab. So we're coming to you from Halifax, Nova Scotia on the unceded territory of the Mi'kmaq people in Mi'kma'ki, where we're really fortunate, feeling especially fortunate to have the opportunity to do restorative thinking and action work based in the wisdom of that this land holds from generations past and present. And we're here for the inaugural launch of a lecture series offered by our fellows and associates. So a few words about the lab, and then I'll move on to introduce our speaker this evening. So the lab is located at the Schulich School of Law at Dalhousie University in Halifax. And our real vision is to be a place and a space, both local and virtually. We had this kind of vision before it became, by necessity or trend, good to be virtual, but where we could gather people together, both in body, mind, and spirit together, to think about how to support justice and social innovations through a restorative approach. And to do that with a commitment to education, with a commitment to innovation, and with a commitment to bringing knowledge to bear in support of both, and to learn all the way along. So one of the great privileges we have at the lab is to be connected to this big and larger community, this international learning community, and I can see lots of faces and names of those who are a vital part of the vision of that community and of the connective tissue that keeps it together and keeps us learning together, and also of local and national opportunities to be connecting up those who are interested in a restorative approach and a principled way of imagining how we might be with one another in all of those places and spaces. Tonight we have this vision of a lab that would include the opportunity to host visitors and those who could bring us knowledge and bring us wisdom and help create community along the way, from internationally and students who were attracted to the lab in this place. We were hoping that would be in person, but in lieu of that, this year we've been convening a significant group of fellows and associates who are a vital part of bringing knowledge to the lab and to bringing it to bear on the work that we do, and hopefully share knowledge with one another to take it back out to nurture the work that they're doing in the world. If you want to know more about our fellows and associates or the work of the lab, we'd love for you to check out the Restorative Lab website at www.restorativlab.ca. And to go to the About Us, Who Are We page, where you have a chance to learn more about the exciting group of fellows and associates that we have, some of whom have agreed to be our first ups in sharing their knowledge and their wisdom and the work that they're doing. And we're so thrilled that tonight we have Holly Northam, who is our inaugural, our very first international fellow, international visiting fellow. She's been visiting virtually, but we put on the screen Holly's bio because I want the opportunity for you to see and to know all of her accomplishments, but also to have the freedom to say that which you may not be able to see from the screen, which is that one of the incredible and remarkable things about Holly is the extent to which she embodies the principles of a restorative approach in the way in which she lives and in the way in which she works in caring for and with others, and the way in which she thinks. And so she brings this to her active work as a scholar, but as a scholar committed to ensuring that knowledge is is purposeful in the sense of what she seeks to know about the world and how to bring it to the benefit of others, and largely those who are often marginalized or left out of the systems and structures of care that we've previously built. She is fierce and very gifted in building welcoming communities. In the School of Nursing, where she has given leadership and where she teaches, in the hospital and healthcare settings where she has worked and continues to be connected to, in the relationships where she's walking alongside with communities and elders, Indigenous peoples, and those in community seeking more just access to care. And in Canberra, where she's been a key leader along with Mary Ivick and a large community of others connected across the University of Canberra and the Australian National University and RegNet and community partners to build and walk towards a vision of restored communities. And so these restorative communities, Canberra being one of them, all try to find one another and benefit from one another's wisdom and knowledge. And this is one more opportunity for us to do that. A couple of housekeeping things before I turn things over to Holly. We've held this not as a webinar on Zoom. Instead, we've held this as a sort of a Zoom meeting because we want it to be a place and space where we can meet and find one another and see one another. And so that means that you can actually ask your questions to Holly afterwards and have a chance to share and see one another. What might be helpful while Holly is presenting is, if you want to have a clearer view of just her, you can go up to the upper right-hand corner of Zoom. At least that's where it is on my PC, and pick the view and pick speaker's view, and that will highlight Holly, or you can find her little square and find the 3 dots, and you can pin her image so that's who's sort of always on your screen as she's talking. You can feel free to leave your camera on or off during the presentation, but maybe when we come back together after for the conversation, so that we have a chance to see one another and be in conversation, we would invite you, if you're in a place in a space where it's possible for you to turn on your camera and be part of the conversation. We also have the chat disabled for generalized chatting, so that we don't distract from the speaker, but we do have it such that you can send a question if you prefer to do it that way. You can send a question to the host or to Catherine. And I'll read those questions and moderate asking those questions in the question and answer, or we'll invite you to just put up your hand at the end and be able to ask your questions or make your comments. Is there any housekeeping? I can't tell you where the washrooms are or what other health needs you might be. I can't provide you cookies and snacks, which I would be happy to do if you can find your way to the lab and to one of these sessions when we're able to hold them in person, but I'm sending all good intentions about cookies and refreshments and self-care. Is there anything else that anyone wants to ask before I turn things over to Holly? Wonderful. Then my friend Holly, I'm so grateful that you're here. I'm so grateful that we have the chance to learn from you and with you today, and I'll turn things over to you to share with us tonight, or this morning, your time.
My goodness, look, thank you so much, Jen. I'm just going to open up my screen and share my screen with everybody. What a remarkable introduction. I have no chance of living up to that. It is such a privilege to be here today. I'm hoping everyone can see the screen okay now. And I must admit, the opportunity to speak to this group in this way is such such an honour, and I think if anybody who's online will know that, particularly from Canberra, we are so in awe of the work that Jennifer Llewellyn does, and all of the team, and Dalhousie and Halifax and Restorative Lab is such a beacon of hope for all of us, and particularly in the restorative community. So today I'd like to start by, flipping there, to acknowledge that I live on Ngunnawal country, and I'd like to acknowledge the Ngunnawal custodians of the unceded lands and water on which I live and work, and their elders past, present and emerging, and all other First Nations peoples and elders whose footsteps I follow. These are two wonderful birds. They are very famous around Canberra, particularly the magpies, super intelligent, have amazing memories. And in some ways, I just adore them when thinking about our restorative community, because they do have a memory. They have such dedication to each other, and they are fiercely protective of their community. So you'll find in Canberra, people do all sorts of weird things when they're riding around their bikes. They'll have amazing helmets with spikes, and they'll have incredible weapons to fight off the magpies, which I think are going to attack them. But we know if we live in Canberra and we are restorative in our approaches with the magpies will befriend us and look after us and take us along a journey. And I have never been attacked because I used to feed the baby magpies, and they remember, and the community remembers. And I guess this is probably a really good starting place for a conversation today about our Canberra restorative community. For those of you who don't know what I'm talking about, I'm living on Ngunnawal country, which is here down in where Canberra is. Canberra is the capital of Australia. And this map is showing all of the First Nations that were here before invasion and colonisation. Just like you look to a map of Europe, you look to a map of South America, all different nations, different languages, different customs, different peoples, different knowledges and incredible strengths. One of the exciting things that are happening in our Canberra community is we're learning more and more, and the ripple of knowledge is starting to spread within our community, to see the strengths that we have in Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander community here in Australia, and to start to recognise that for just relationships, which is what we need in a restorative community, we have to know, hear and understand what we have lost, but what's also still there, and build on that for the future. And I'd like to particularly acknowledge, I noticed of the people who are in the chat today, who've joined the meeting. Carol, thank you for joining us, Carol. Wonderful to see you. And I'm working with Carol along with a lot of other people to help make our community a healthier, happier place. So these are some of the elders I work with who are just amazing. Auntie Agnes Shea is the most senior Ngunnawal elder. And to be an elder, it's not just about being older, it's about wisdom, it's about being appointed into a position of knowledge as a knowledge holder. And so the people represented in this photo are incredibly important. They were part of a blessing of our University of Canberra Hospital that came about because of our approaches to building restorative community in our healthcare system. And this was our new University of Canberra Hospital being culturally blessed at the time it was opened. So Auntie Rosalind Brown is one of our chief guides in our Canberra restorative community, and Auntie Caroline, who received an honorary doctorate just last Thursday at the University of Canberra. Amazing knowledge holders who really help to guide the work that we're doing and to open our eyes to the future. So back in the day, we had a beautiful group of people came together, and one of them's, well, there are many of them online today. Mary Ivick, I'd like to particularly acknowledge, she's here today, and Gail Burford I spotted as well, Jennifer Llewellyn, who all came to Canberra and did a lot of workshops around setting up a restorative community. This is an image of Canberra. As I said, we're the nation's capital. This is our Parliament House over here. We have a man-made lake, which sort of flooded a lot of the ancestral meeting grounds. But anyway, I think we've reconciled to that, and we now enjoy the beauty of the lake. And we have a thriving community of about 400,000 people, which is growing rapidly. We have the problems that every other city has of poverty, of homelessness, And there's a misconception in Australia that Canberra is the city of milk and plenty, and with much largesse. But in fact, we are like every other community. We work very hard to support each other and to support our community. So the restorative approach that's formed the way that we now are trying to build our community stemmed back from about 2015, and the words that are actually on this page are written by Jennifer Llewellyn. So you can see how by our connections, by our relationships, we continue to strengthen each other. This is a beautiful image of one of the sculptures which fronts our parliamentary triangle. And it points to, you can see here what we have is the parade of flags, which is every flag of every country in the world. So we come together as a multicultural community, we come together as a diverse community, and we come together with an opportunity to make a future focused community which is built on justice and hope and equity. So the beautiful words here, which I am going to read out because they are just so beautiful. What is a restorative approach in a restorative city? A restorative approach starts from a relational understanding of human beings, of who we are and what we need from one another. Being a restorative city is a vision of what it means to be a community, to live in community and to be part of a Canberra community. It is focused on asking, how can we live and work in ways that foster the connections to one another that we need to be well, to be safe, and to flourish? It is as much about how you recognise and strive to address the problems of relationship and inclusion and of difference as of the harms of the past and the present. There will always be things to work on, and this is the call of a restorative approach. It's about being restorative. And this goes back to what Jennifer very kindly said in her introduction to myself. I would love to be a really wonderful restorative person and live this in every aspect of my life. And I try, but I must admit I'm not perfect. And I think most of us are a little bit like that. So it is about being conscious of the way we are and how we turn up for each other. So I'm going to just position myself here a little bit because I'm talking about my work and I'm talking about critiquing my behaviours, which are not perfect, and trying to be open to hearing other people's voices and points of view. Because to be in just relationships with other people, we have to listen and we have to be alert. So I consider those restorative justice principles, and I think about the critical importance of cultural humility. To enable respect, of listening deeply to the voices who have lived experience, and for me to and others to acknowledge what is heard. And this really sits within those aspirations that we have for a restorative community. For our position in Australia here, where we have great injustices for our First Nations people, I posit that it's only by actually authentically decolonising each one of ourselves each one of us to think of our relationship with the other, that non-Indigenous people can address the critical relational harms, and by doing that, then we can enable acknowledgement. We can acknowledge that this harm has happened. We can acknowledge its current impact in our community. So in Canberra, that may be the huge life gap, the life opportunities to live a full and happy life. We see it in compounding grief for families that lose their loved ones much earlier than other families. We see it in incarceration, we see it in mental health problems, we see it in high dementia rates, we see it in many harms that are here because of our history. And once we can start that acknowledgement and to actually start that idea of reciprocity, healing can begin and a new social contract with First Nations people can commence. And so by doing that, I argue, if we do that with our First Nations people, every one of us benefits. And we're all then much better prepared to stand together to address social injustice in whatever setting that we're faced with. I hope this makes sense. I'm just sort of feel as though early in the morning probably rabbiting on too much, but it's each one of us plays such an important role with the people that we've talked to. We are neighbours. So just to clarify, because throwing around terms is always, what is cultural humility? And it was written by American scholars in 1998, Devalian and Murray Garcia, and it was originally described in a healthcare context, but it's totally relevant to across the board, I believe. It's a lifelong commitment to self-evaluation and critique, to redressing power imbalances in the patient-physician dynamic, and that it can translate into every one of our dynamics, and to develop mutually beneficial and non-paternalistic partnerships of communities on behalf of individuals and defined populations. And another really important interpretation of that is to say that that when you don't know, to say that you do not know when you really do not know. So not fluffing it and pretending to know when you really don't. So if you're representing that population, it might be homeless. Oh, well, I understand how you feel. What a load of rubbish. I'm sorry, but so this is the basis of these ideas of cultural humility. So, pretty picture. This is our back ridge. Mary and I live in a beautiful place, and Carol as well, where the hills surround us. Canberra was designed with nature parks to run through and around all of the developments. So there's a contour line above which you can't build, and that means that we have as our beautiful black bush capital events become surrounded by trees, beautiful native plants and animals, and it makes it very healing as a restorative community. So I'm sure I'm preaching to the converted here. So what is restorative practice? Just in case there's somebody who's joined who's going, oh, this is new to me, I'd really like to understand a little bit more. And I've taken it from a definition from Wanganui, New Zealand, that my colleagues Mary and Auntie Ros and Uncle Wayne and others that became very closely involved in, and our international restorative community have also got deep roots in Wanganui. And so they've defined restorative practice as a philosophy in action that places respectful relationships at the heart of every one of our interactions. This relational approach is grounded in beliefs about the equality, dignity, and potential of all people, and about just structures and systems that enable people to thrive and to succeed together. It sounds so good, but it's really hard. So let's go in a little bit further. Why is it so important? To build those principled trusting relationships, we provide hope for the silenced, but who are also very powerfully resilient populations who are excluded and disempowered, not because of who they are, but by unjust laws, by unjust policies, and by unjust practices. We have institutional racism in Australia, which is mind-blowing, and we see evidence of it on so many accounts, but so often the people who are part of the systems can't see it because they haven't been able to stand aside to feel what it feels like to be that person who's being impacted. And so those ideas of cultural safety or the person telling you that they feel safe rather than you saying, oh, we've put these policies in place, they're safe. That's the difference. So in a restorative community, we flip that. So we listen, we ask the family where a child is being removed, do you think this is a fair policy? Do you think that everything's being done to protect the child? Is your child going to have a better life now because we've been so helpful in this situation? It's asking the people who are involved, does this work, and how do you feel? So our work has identified that restorative practice can be used to anticipate and prevent harm, as well as to heal trauma. So for many people that I've met along the way, they say restorative justice, restorative processes and practices being, oh, that's about the legal system. That's all about law. That's all about how we deal with the courts. And you go, well, yes, but the law and society interact like that. And so what we can work from learning from what the law and how the law is used and how the law is understood, we can transform our health systems, we can transform education, we can transform many other areas. So this is why restorative practice is important. So who are the people that make up a restorative community? And so can only talk from our Canberra experience, because our restorative community are pretty amazing. At the moment, I'm very privileged to have taken on the role of convener of a restorative community, following on after the amazing Mary Iveck, who's online, thank you Mary, who continues to hold all the connections together. So the people are diverse. So at the moment on our database, we have around about 600 people who get an email every couple of weeks saying, this is what's going on, we're going to have a meeting, turn up if you feel like it, just don't if you don't want to, do however you want to be, just have that subconscious awareness that we're doing something and we're here. So the people that we have at the moment on our database are policymakers, academics, they're people who have suffered all sorts of harms within the justice system, within child protection. They're people who are foster parents, they're people who are nurses, who are teachers. There are people who are at every walk of life. They might be heading government departments, they might be ministers, they might be retirees who are just wanting to give back a little to their community. And those people who are wanting to give back a little to the community make up the biggest proportion of the people who are active in our community. Often with nothing other than the most wonderful hearts of gold. So creating a restorative community, how did it happen? And how do we work today? Well, we've recently been providing pulling together a report to go to the European Restorative Justice Conference on for an international travel guide for restorative cities. And one of the things, as we trace back the history, Mary often would say the words, Mary Iveck would often say the words, John Braithwaite said to me, invite them and they will come. And so the wonderful work of Professors John and Valerie Braithwaite are instrumental in our restorative community. They live here, they have helped us to flourish. So that is what happens. There have been workshops, there have been gatherings, many gatherings face-to-face, and I'm going to take you through a few of the little ones that we've been involved in. But what is the thing that brings people? It's not about being seen as important. It's not about something that the person's going to get out of it, other than that sense of well-being and connection to people who are like-minded, who want to do good in the world and want the community to be a healthy, happy place. So what is a restorative community? This restorative community is a group of people that turn up for each other. This is an example of one of our wonderful dinners, beautifully hosted by Fiona Tito Wheatland and Anna, her daughter. You'll see in there, for people who know him, Paul Nixon, David Purnell, and Mary Iveck, and so many others. And this is an example of how restorative communities work. It is generous giving of time, of place, of community, of food. Jennifer, in saying today, I'd give you bickies if you're here, or cookies, make yourself comfortable. This is part of a restorative community. We know that Maslow's hierarchy of needs are around, you need a shelter, you need food, these are all things that form the safety net that enable secure relationships and just relationships. Our First Nations community and our friends from overseas, we all work together to make this community wholesome, to be connected and to be powerful. And this is where we're growing. Our strength in our restorative community is growing since we've developed really strong relationships with our elders, with our First Nations elders, incredibly powerful learnings. And I'll take you through a little bit more about how they're influencing the way we think. Now, we don't have cold in Canberra. We don't have snowstorms and the threat of loss of power, but we do have bushfires. And our community comes together at good times and in bad times. We've had terrible threats in our community in Canberra, and although we are the nation's capital, we lost many houses and lives were lost in major bushfires just recently. These communities do, these events harm communities, but out of the difficulties and the pain that comes out of those tragedies and those difficult times, which are inevitable in each community, we all have loss, we all have trauma, we all have suffering. This is where our community has the potential to show the most ability to flourish and to give hope. So there is always a rainbow after the storm, and you know, we after our terrible droughts, we're now experiencing floods in Australia, but in Canberra we're very lucky at the moment. We've just got some beautiful rain, and the country is looking gorgeous. Our people keep coming together and supporting each other. We know that there's always an underlying issue for many people. Each one of us, we don't know the other's trauma, we don't know the other's life, we don't know what other things people are carrying. But as a restorative community, we know that by respecting, by caring, and by showing compassion and empathy to the person around beside us, that person is lifted up automatically. And that happens a lot in our community, and I have to thank our community for that uplifting work right now. So it's these strengths. So restorative community, it is basically using a strengths-based approach to be future focused about thinking about what can we do to make a difference in our world. These are two black swans. Yes, that's not a mistake for those of you who are used to white swans. They're Australian swans. We are different here. We're very proud of our wildlife, and that is our beautiful lake. But what we do know is that there's much that we can learn from our relationships with each other, which will continue to strengthen us. So a key factor that I see as important, and it's impacting my work, so I can't put this out to everyone else, but I certainly see it, and I'm hoping our community will see it more and more, that when we're thinking about health, and in fact in many of Indigenous languages, health is not a word in Australia, because it's something that's much more holistic. It's not just the physical well-being of the individual, but the social, emotional, and cultural well-being of the whole community. And it's a whole of life view, and it includes the cyclical concept of life, death, life. So for many First Nations, there's always that recognition that we stand on the shoulders of those who've gone before. We recognise the elders. We recognise that everything that we do impacts on the next steps of our lives. The people who have gone before us, they impact us. If we've suffered severe trauma, we know now, the epigenetics tell us that that will actually impact the life of the future baby, of the future person. So this is incredibly wise definition. And I think if we started to think about this in the way we do our planning, the way we do with thinking about our institutions, rather than separating here's health, here's education, here's a prison system, here's this, here's that, here's the other, and so that actually a person goes through all of these things in the stages of their life, and to see that interconnectedness, that will start, I believe, to build a stronger restorative community, because we can see each other in context and be able to support where the support is needed at the time. Australian Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people are not the only people to think this way. In New Zealand, again, it's a family focus. The health of an individual is only as good as the health of their whole family. So I had an interesting discussion the other night, very privileged, with a new coroner. And we were talking about some of the issues that we see in our coronial system, and a little bit of an epiphany that I've had recently. I might not have had, so I'm willing to be challenged. Please tell me, you know, this is my humility. There's lots I don't know. But as a nurse and a midwife who's come out of a Western healthcare system, and I've been schooled in Beauchamp and Childress bioethical models of healthcare, and the focus on autonomy in our society is quite damaging, I believe. And we haven't seen that the individual, that autonomy is only useful if the family is also supporting, and the family might be who the person describes as family, it does not have to be that blood relative, but it's who that person sees as their family, because it's all about connections which help to make us strong. And that's what we see in our restorative community. We each need each other. We each lift each other up when we need to be lifted up, and we help lift the others up when their time is needed. And at any one time, we can't work as an island, and that's it. And I'm going to pause it right here. I'm going right out there. Sorry, it's my Tuesday morning rant. When we look at the problems we're having in Australia, I can talk about, because that's where I live, in families coping with parents at work, with children and trying to get daycare, trying to get everybody into daycare because they have to work. The breakdown in relationships, the idea of a nuclear family, it's dissolved as well. People are in isolation. People are in isolation, trying to survive their individual lives without being, and then being pulled apart even further. So, for instance, say the 16-year-old turns up in the emergency department with a mental health problem. The family aren't told unless that the 16-year-old gives permission. So where are the help structures coming in? Who are the right people who should be in the room? So we think about the impact of family group conferencing, for instance, in the work of child protection in New Zealand. And we think, well, maybe we should be thinking about family group conferencing and ideas of that and applying that to every other aspect of our lives, and not just holding it there in that little spot. Anyway, just a thought. So what are the benefits of restorative approaches? We see them at an individual level. For an individual, we can see them at a community level, connecting people to other people in the community. The social impacts are very real. We've got lots of evidence. There was a fabulous economic impact statement on child protection done within Canberra by Rhiannon Williams and her colleagues. That was requested by the Canberra Restorative Community, led by Mary Ivek. That showed the very real cost of child removals to the community, way in excess of the family supporting the child to stay in a safe relationship with their family. And we look at the environment, and of course, I don't need to tell anybody about the impact of climate change. Our bushfires, very much when we look back at it, our elders, our Indigenous custodians tell us that we have managed our environment in Australia totally wrong. There were ways of managing the environment which were developed over 60,000 years of custodianship, which protected the community from fires. They used what they called cultural burns. They did coal burns to protect and to build the environment and to support the environmental growth. There's much we can learn at our restorative community level, and that work is starting to happen within our local community, where Indigenous knowledges are starting to be applied to protect our community and to protect our environment. So there are many ways in which we play a role. This is our University of Canberra health faculty coming out as a unified call to action from Australian nursing and midwifery to ensure that Black Lives Matter. So in the same way in the US, the problem of disproportionate incarceration, disproportionate harm for people of colour, in Australia we have the same thing. We have that added complexity that the policies of, I would say, almost genocide and annihilation of our First Nations people meant that everything that was possible was done to try to remove colour from Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people by child removals, and so as a result, there were rapes, there were child removals, there were every other kind of harm done to a local community. So many Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people now have what is known as fair skin, so have lost the ability to say I am First Nations because of the impact of those policies and those activities on their colour. So that makes it even more difficult, because then the lateral violence comes in as to, and non-Indigenous people will say, you can't be First Nations because you don't look like you're a First Nations person. This is a huge issue in Australia, and it impacts on multiple levels. So when people come to a hospital and they say, I'm Aboriginal heritage and this is my family, they might have a nurse say, no, you're not, you don't look like an Aboriginal person. So the racism is deeply, deeply entrenched in our systems. So each one of us is in health and our health professions and across our community can make a massive, play a massive role in helping to prevent further deaths. At the moment, we've had over 500 deaths of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people in custody since the Royal Commission into deaths in custody for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people, and it continues. So spaces where restorative practice can make a difference. So in a place where there's inequality, where there's questions of faith and religion, going back to what I was talking about before, that idea of the fact that our nuclear Western society seems to becoming more and more isolated. All of our societies here in Australia anyway, there's questioning of values, questions of faith and religion. People don't feel safe in expressing their faith. They don't feel necessarily safe in expressing their religion, and their shared values are being lost. So those ideas of respecting another person for their faith, respecting them for their religion, is something in a restorative community that we think about. And that idea that I see you and you see me for who I am, and I can hold my identity and feel safe. Those ideas of know my name, being heard, are really important for us to work in positive relationship. So it comes back to power and information balance. And I know, we often complain here in Canberra that there's not enough transparency in information and in data collecting. One of the things we learned in New Zealand is that in the Wanganui community, when we visited, they would publish sentinel events, the events that caused harm and suffering that occurred in the healthcare system. They would report and publicly present data on restraint for patients with mental health problems in their forensic units, and also pharmaceutical restraint. So we can see that it has a place in the justice system, no brainer. On victim impact, such an important role. In the case of disability, where people often don't feel that their voices are heard. Health, housing, aged care, education, child protection, mental health care, especially forensic, employment, and institutional cultures. So these are all just some of the spaces where we can see restorative practice making a difference. And there are spaces that we're exploring in Canberra. We've held workshops on a range of these issues that have been very positive and very supportive of moving forward as a restorative community. This is one of my favourite photos in the world. This was when we had Relationships Australia, Alison Brooke, brought a team from an international restorative community from Leeds and Hull to Canberra. And we had Paul Nixon here as well. And we had a restorative circle, a yarning circle at our Legislative Assembly, which is where our seat of governance. The gentleman here is our Attorney General, Shane Rattenbury, supporting that idea. And at this particular circle, there were pledges made about child protection and what each one of the people present, and many were ministers, many senior administrators and politicians, were giving their pledge to what they could do to try and make things a little different. Our next trick is to, as a restorative community, is to work out ways of making sure we hold each other to account to make sure we follow through on all of our pledges. And that's a work in progress. So some of the feedback from that learning session that we had at the time, that was led by our Various Relationships Australia group from Hull and Leeds, were outstanding leaders in the work need 4 key qualities. So this is for each one of us: unwarranted optimism. We need to regard crisis as norm and complexity as fun. And I think, given our relationships are tricky. We need an endless supply of intellectual curiosity. So I know I've floated some ideas today and you're probably going, oh my goodness, what was she thinking? But if we don't ask these questions, we will never learn anything different. So it might be wrong, that's fine, but hopefully it's triggered some ideas today. And this is really important and it's hard. And I'll talk about that briefly in a moment. We need a complete absence of paranoia and self-pity. This is hard stuff. And when we're in leadership positions, we need to be really, really clear. We've got to throw out the cynicism. It's got to go. So we're looking, and to get our restorative community right, we need to start from the youngest and take it through to the eldest. We need to make sure that every person in that life circle of life, death, life, that idea of health, thrive. So for pregnant women and newborns to thrive, and Carol, that's your work. We're really looking forward to it. Young children to do well and ready for school, and we've just got some wonderful new connections happening in our education department. We're hoping to flourish further there. And children to grow up in healthy, are safe, and live in supportive families. And we've got to remember families are what the family see as family. And family doesn't have to be the nuclear family with mum and dad and that's it. There's families in the Indigenous world in Australia where interconnected groups of people who may not actually be in totally blood relations. The aunties, the families are quite diverse in who is actually providing the care. So we need to think much more creatively about how we connect and how we support families and who are families and what we see as families. It takes a village to raise a child, as we know. We want children, young children, to achieve their potential and have them well prepared for adult life. And children, young people and families are able to influence decisions which affect their lives. So that's our dream, and that's the work the road that we're on at the moment. So within our Faculty of Health, we know that our child protection statistics remain horrendous. Within Australia, these are about a year or two old now. They're actually worse now. So that lovely little red line, it was dipped in 2019, it's actually gone back up again. We're doing very badly. And so part of our work has been just to, now our faculty knows this, and we're telling everybody that we possibly can, because one of the biggest failures in our community is a lack of information, a lack of knowledge. If people don't know, they can't change, they can't act, they can't advocate, they can't see the problem, they can't see the person, they can't see those that they're caring for. So at every opportunity, we tell everybody how bad it is, how many children are in care, and we tell everybody about the fact that in the ACT, we have the highest incarceration rate of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people per capita anywhere in the world. So we keep saying it. It's difficult. No relationship's perfect. And we live in a restorative community with lots of different people. We talked before about the dynamics. We all come from different places. We all have different drivers. We all have different motivations. For some of us, our work in restorative community is what puts dinner on the table. For us, some of us, we're working in policy for a government that might not necessarily agree entirely with what our views are. There's a lot of potential here for relationship breakdown. Yeah, that's difficult. That's my grieving daughter. I'll call her back shortly. There are lots of potentials for conflicts of interest, and it makes it really, really difficult to be able to work that pathway somewhere. So what we're doing as our community, because we know that there are times when people come together and there are times when people fall off, they might not feel that they're heard or seen or needed anymore. So we're actually going to be hosting a workshop, would you believe, called Kindness Isn't Weakness, in about a month's time, where we're going to work through how can we come up with our values charter so that in Canberra, in our special community, we can know how to manage our potential conflicts of interest. We know, Jennifer mentioned before I came on about gag orders for public health workers. We know that there are times when people are told by the administration that they can't say things. we need to be able to allow those people to have a space to connect, to feel included, and for us all to be included and to work through those tensions as they emerge. So this is an ongoing issue, and it's something that if we don't see up front, we pay constant attention to, and we need to constantly be lifting to bring people together to solve those problems. So those just relationships, that golden rule, and I've said a lot about Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander cultures, First Nations cultures, across many of the great religions, that golden rule in the Jewish faith, in a Muslim faith, in the Christian faith, do unto others as you would have them do unto you, or care for your neighbour as yourself. Those are basic tenets across all of the cultures, all of the First Nations, across all of history. And if we can actually do that, then our community will be a much better place, and we can be proactive to prevent harm and to have these perfect hospitals that are flourishing with compassion and advocacy for truth, dignity, respect, so that we can have healing. So I'd like to finish up with one of the strengths that we have been gifted by Auntie Rosalind Brown, our Ngunnawal Elder in residence here at the University of Canberra, who is also the co-chair of United Ngunnawal Elders Council and the co-chair of the Ngunnawal Bush Healing Farm. The charter was pulled together after many camps, following a lot of lateral violence, a lot of trauma, a lot of suicide and death amongst the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander community, brought about because of the impact of dispossession and genocidal practices. So the charter is the United Ngunnawal Elders Charter, and I'm going to read it because I think the words are so restorative and something that should be guiding each one of us. Our unity is a journey of healing. We have taken the first big step, and along the path, people will join us and leave, but everyone is welcome. In welcoming people, we know the following to be true: that our elders have our respect. We are honoured by their giving respect back. We acknowledge them for assuming responsibility as leaders in our community. We need to come together to create our future, one in which everyone has a place where they can feel proud, have dignity, and feel they belong. That communication is everything, and we do this in a supportive way to know more about each other, our history, and our culture. These knowledges we make are ours together, although it belongs not only to us, but it's also for our kids and grandkids too. And it is for them that we do this work now. It takes courage to do work for the greater good. We need to learn how to solve problems, not to include, not isolate, to listen with our hearts and speak from our souls. In being courageous, we are a direct link back to the dream time. This is the essence of Aboriginality, as is our relationship to land. In this journey, we strive for unity. We do this by empowering people, creating confidence, self-esteem, and room for difference, so we can work and laugh together, moving forward all the while. We, each and every one of us, want this, not only for ourselves and our families, we want this too for people who need it the most. So it's a wonderful Auntie Ros and her niece Lanice, who's a future elder in training, and myself at one of our events. So those just relationships that we're trying to achieve in our Canberra restorative community look like this. This was a remarkable sculpture gifted to our restorative healthcare team when we did our visit to Wanganui, and then the Wanganui elders and leaders returned to visit us. And this is a rock that has come from a mountain on the North Island of New Zealand. It's sharp, it's pointed, it's been thrown to the very top. And as you know, New Zealand has many earthquakes, it's highly volcanic, it's a very tumultuous geological space. This rock has been sitting on a riverbed on the South Island, and it's been tossed and turned and rubbed smooth by the currents and the other rocks around it and polished over time. And then it was beautifully carved by Ned. Ned is a spiritual guide, a homoana. This signifies the waves, the hoas, the oars, as the wakas pulled across the ocean and came together. And on the back, it's signed by all the homoana and elders. This is a leaf that came from the smoking ceremony that we held when this was presented to us here in Canberra in our restorative community. And it was blessed by the elders, smoked by the elders. And what this whole beautiful representation is of our relationships, and how in order for us to sustain and to achieve our objectives, to achieve reconciliation, to achieve a just community, we need to be able to withstand all that tumultuous tossing and turning, the pressures that push us all the time. This rock balances on a tiny, 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 tiny point, and it can only stand there when I'm in the right frame of mind, because otherwise it won't balance. It will fall over. And that's like all of our relationships. We have to work so hard to keep them in balance, and we should never take them for granted. We have to work hard at this. It's a work in progress. There will always be things come out of the blue that knock us and throw us about. But this is what our colleagues in Wanganui, our colleagues, I believe, in Halifax and in each of our international restorative community is seeking to achieve. So my call to action that I throw out to anybody who's in Canberra anyway, particularly, and my students, is be personally accountable. Use unconditional positive regard and cultural humility to learn more about others. Question every aspect of your thinking and actions. Be alert to casual racism. Question the source of your information. Is the voice you are listening to that of a person who's experienced the situation? Beware of unbalanced, misleading and racist media and communication. Australia's shame. This is specifically for my lovely colleagues online. Please send in your mandatory reports. So for nurses and midwives, we are mandatory reporters. When we know that there is harm being done to a child, we have to report it. We need to send across Australia, all of the nurses and midwives and healthcare workers need to send in mandatory reports to politicians, police and leaders responsible for incarceration of children from the age of 10. Their removal from their mothers, fathers, grandparents, families, communities and hope for the future is damaging. So we can do this better. And finally, be kind, culturally sensitive and care about what happens. And I hope that we can achieve these amazing things, because we do have a vision for a new social contract. Nara, which is Ngunnawal word for a place of belonging, so that we can all belong together in our community. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Holly. What a fabulous way to invite us in to think about the vision and the hopes of a restorative community in the places we're coming from on the screen, but through our connection to the place where you are and the relationships you're building. What a fabulous challenge and call to action. And so this is our call into conversation. So what was important to us in imagining the opportunity to have this sort of seminar series was to be able to foster a chance for us to see and hear one another and have a chance to benefit from the incredible research and actions that some of our fellows and associates are taking, but also to have these gathering points, these excuses and opportunities to come together to hear and to listen, but also to share and talk with one another. So I invite you, if you can, because we don't get to see each other ironically very much in this virtual world, if you're in a place and space where it makes sense to be able to turn on your cameras so we can see one another, that's great. And I'll open the floor with opportunities for people to comment about something that resonated for you, to ask a question about something you want to know more about, to share a connection to the work that you're doing, and more broadly to offer any kind of connected insight. So I just kind of invite anyone who has a question to put up their hand. And in the meantime, I wanted, Holly, I wondered if you might say a teeny bit more about some of the work that has gone on to thinking most recently around healthcare and restorative hospitals, and partly what I was thinking you might say a little bit more about was the thing we glimpsed here was the yarning circles and the ways in which you brought into education and into this learning about their professional roles the opportunity to sort of do some of that reflective learning and connection with others, and in part because of the hope and promise that also offers us around how you bring together restorative communities and how we come together as an international learning community. So I wonder if you'd start by saying a teeny bit more about that as a jumping off point while people get their questions sorted out and either typed out or their hands up.
Thanks, Jennifer. Thank you so much. Look, yes, the work on the healthcare system, there is much to be done. One of the pieces of work that we're just finishing up at the moment as a priority is Month of Yarning, and that's looking at the healthcare journey. So here again, this is for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people, but it resonates for all people in that when we see a person accessing healthcare, we often see them as at individual events. You know, there might be the tonsillectomy, there might be, you know, the croup. Well, start with the croup maybe, or then maybe a bit later on a tonsillectomy, maybe something else. The person isn't seen as a person across those systems. So, for instance, say you have a mum who, and this goes back to the really important things that we are challenged by. The mum who has the child removed. The infant removed at birth. What's the future life journey of that infant? What's the future life journey of that mother? And and not only the mother, the grandmother, the father, the uncles, but everybody, the wider community, the wider family, the people who are patterned in that. And we see in the data that's coming through that there are huge implications, because there are potential harms which are exacerbated. Chronic health conditions become much more apparent. Early death is definitely much more apparent in those situations. And none of this is rocket science. It's pretty obvious and pretty predictable, but as a society and as our institutions, we don't actually seem to see it that way. So for instance, in having a conversation the other day with the coroner, that idea that if every family, after they'd had a death in the hospital, had an opportunity a week or 2 weeks later to meet with the doctor and the nurses involved in the care of that person at end of life, to have any clarifying questions sorted, that would probably reduce the number of court cases and the amount, and certainly the trauma. In some of our cases take years to go to court, and people don't understand why it's a coroner's case. And even though there are great structures in place now to try and support them, back at the hospital, if we could actually do this at the hospital, it would limit the harm enormously and the impact on the community. And it would also probably give a lot more satisfaction to the healthcare staff who get tired and burnt out, because they know there's conflict and they know that there's unhappy families, and that can't be satisfying. Well, I know it's not satisfying when you go home and you go, oh, I wish we'd been able to explain that better, and there is not that follow-up time. So it's, really simple things like structuring conversations. I know John Braithwaite talks about a cup of tea and a chat. A cup of tea and a chat following a major life event, whether it's a surgery that didn't go as planned, whether it's whatever it is within the healthcare system, that alone, if we could start to do that. Another area which is so important, that's coming under our scope vision at the moment, is when plans are made, end-of-life plan, care plans are done, when a decision's made that, no, we're not going to do resuscitation, we're not going to do whatever, and the doctor writes it all out. But question, have the family read that, and have they understood and have they agreed? Just because the doctor says that the family have heard and understood and agreed doesn't mean to say they actually have. Let the family read it. Let the family countersign, but yes, they understood what that meant. Give them a copy of it to take away to read with a friend or our other family. We've got to stop being so fearful of allowing agency of individuals. And as far as yarning circles go, they are great. I think one of our biggest challenges when we talk about yarning circles, like restorative circles, it's about listening, it's about properly respecting. My biggest concern is, particularly here in Canberra and the work that we're doing at our university, is making sure we don't appropriate knowledge which isn't ours as a non-Indigenous person. So we're having a tussle at the moment about appropriate respect for yarning circles as to who should be actually able to convene a yarning circle versus a learning circle. Who should, what is the difference? How do we recognise that Indigenous knowledge so we're not busily appropriating more stuff and causing more harm?
I love the kind, I'm struck by what you said in your talk about thinking about our assumptions around autonomy and choice, and how we valorize that without thinking about the conditions that are needed for that really to be exercised. And so I was thinking about that end of life care process where what a restorative approach actually does is create then those conditions around how do people actually have informed consent and make choices. Well, we rarely make them all by ourselves, right? And it's how do you foster those kinds of conditions in the healthcare system that are actually needed for informed consent and good choice. And that's fascinating. There was a question about picking up on the comments you made about paying attention not only to the sort of vision of a restorative community, but the journey to there, and that the journey is sometimes tricky. I think you said in thinking about why people come to these processes and where they might not have the freedom to participate fully, or where their relationships even within these communities might be structured around the way they have to show up as professionals and the way that they show up in community, and the tensions and dilemmas across systems. And I'm interested in any advice you might have about how you continue. So cup of tea, I got that part, but how you continue to hold the space. This is the sort of question about what advice you would have about overcoming that and sustaining those kinds of relationships in the midst of the kind of complexities of how we can show up, how people who work in the system and people who work outside the system and people who work across different issues can be sustained in that kind of work together. Any advice from you or Mary or others who are navigating those waters on the day-to-day?
Look, one of the things that I think is really important, and Mary and I have spoken about this a lot in the past, and I'll throw to Mary in a second, is that idea of thinking about who isn't there. So when it's lovely when everybody turns up and we see the people who are there, but it's always asking who's not here, who's being left behind, and being proactive and following. And it's really hard. We know that to maintain a relationship, we can really only hold a close relationship with a few people because of time, all the other factors that are involved in maintaining relationships. There is a calculation, I believe, of how many close relationships you can actually hold, which I'm not going to go into because that's not restorative, because we want lots of relationships. But it's really, I think you have to be really proactive in thinking about the other person. If they're not here, are they okay? Is everything all right? And sometimes we inadvertently offend, and being alert to that. Those courageous conversations are really important. And this is where I think hopefully in our workshop that's coming up, we'll be able to talk about how can we have those courageous conversations so that we can have honesty and trust, but maintain that respect, the empathy and kindness, which is so important, because this comes back to that idea that kindness isn't weakness. It's kind to have that conversation rather than to let it disappear and to lose that relationship. So that would be one thought. Mary, over to you.
Good morning, Holly, and good morning, everyone. Lovely to see you. And it's nice to know that there are friends online who I can't see, but Yeah, look, I think that for me, I think that, how to keep it going and how we've sort of gotten here is to try to sort of reach beyond our own sort of comfort zones, if you like, and this idea, and I see it often in Canberra where, government speaks to government or universities speak to universities, but it's actually getting everyone together and trying to sort of get that just the variety and that idea. I have a friend who says, don't read everything you believe. We usually think of don't believe everything you read. And my friend Sarah says, well, don't read everything you believe, like read other things. And I think, well, it's like, become uncomfortable, walk in someone else's shoes that, might be, don't fit or have the stone in their shoe, and see what that is like. And I think that until we sort of keep reaching beyond and creating those new connections and building new connections, I think Nigel from Leeds used to say, start somewhere and it will take you everywhere. And just the connections that we have, that we've discovered, just in terms of, it's almost uncanny, the sorts of connections that we've had with Wanganui and with Deep Saini, who was the Vice Chancellor of the University of Canberra, who's now at the Dalhousie University, whose grandfather is buried in Wanganui. I mean, the extraordinary connections that are sort of generational emerge. And I think it is, it is demanding, and it does consume time, but without it, we actually can't do the work without actually building those strong relationships, without having those, cups of tea. And I think that, just always looking at, so neuroscience, neurons that wire together, fire together. And it's a bit like that with our relationships, until you sort of, firing and wiring with others, that's where the magic happens. And I think that not being able to control things, we have to be comfortable with that, and it goes so against how we often work and how our KPIs. And there's a glue there that we just need to value. That's it for me. There's lots of other people on the line.
And I'll just add, if that's okay, Mary just triggered a thought. The living web, which Auntie Ros, our Venerable Elder, has taught us about, the living web is that spider's web, and we're like that spider's web of connections, and the threads are really strong, but they're all over the place. And it's trying to keep that really lovely, strong connection. We have space between the strands, and it's really paying attention to keep that network strong, to let it grow and get bigger and bigger and catch more in.
I was going to turn to Brenda Morrison, speaking of sort of our webs to connect, who's coming to us from BC and from the Center for Restorative Justice at SFU, which is an important collaborative part of the network of care and support of the Restorative Lab and the international learning community. And she's put a couple of questions and comments in the chat. I wonder, Brenda, if I could invite you to turn on your mic and ask that directly so that we can have more voices.
Thanks so much, Jennifer. And it's so great to be here with all these wonderful people, and that the inaugural lecture of the lab takes us all the way back to Australia, which is my launching ground for this work. So I'm grateful to all the wisdom that I gained down at the Australian National University. I just want to, I could go on forever here, but I won't. So my two questions is that I'm really thrilled to see the restorative work deepening in terms of the relational culture with the Indigenous First Nation stewards of the land. And I remember I learned a lot from them way back when. in partnership with the University of Canberra when I was a tutor for First Nations people way back when. But so that's great that that work is deepening. And it also takes me back, I guess, initially to, you mentioned the word hope and early on, and we were playing with hope. And I remember that Val Braithwaite wrote a whole volume on hope. And what we're playing with an idea here, and I posted it, there's a new book out on critical hope that sort of deepens our understanding of hope. And I'm wondering the role that hope plays and how you think about hope. So it's not blind hope, it's critical, reflective, relational hope. So I'm wondering how you're thinking about hope, maybe building on the work of Val Braithwaite. And then two, because my work down there began in education. And I'm wondering how that's, usually there's this wave of restorative, we sort of rise and then we have to go into some deep reflection, it rises again. So I'm wondering how the work in school wave again. And I was thinking that there's that new report by UNESCO that was just released in the last couple of weeks, that a lot of the points of flourishing that you touched on are really included in that report. And I'm wondering if if you were consulted or drawing on it at all. So too many
questions, Brenda. Okay, firstly, the hope question. From personally, my research is very much around looking at that role of hope, and that's how I connected initially with Val. I was using the concept of deep hope, a palliative care concept, in my PhD, and exploring the experiences of families as they made organ donation decisions, and that role of hope, and came up and devised a deep hope model of decision making for organ donation. And so it keeps coming back time after time. So but deep hope that I reference is around the hope beyond death. The idea that, and this comes back to that vision of health being life-death life cycle. So if you've got hope in the future and it's come from hope in the past, it strengthens you on the way. So people, in their lives, you can see it building and building, and when there's problems, and that hope is lost, that's when it becomes very traumatic and difficult. So I haven't actually read that UNESCO report, so I'll have to hunt that one down. I don't think I've picked up on it. It's marking season here, so we're a bit snowed with that. But look, I think those ideas of hope are absolutely critical. And as Val said to me, she talked about trust and then hope. I challenged her. I said, actually, and in fact, my model, we went in with the trust, then hope, and we tested that, and we came out, actually, it was deep hope. And that was about the meaning. It was the meaning that was more important than trust. So families, they might have lost trust in the healthcare system and the doctors and the nurses, but their hope in meaning for their loved one's future life and that memory of their loved one would make them make decisions which were about the hope and not about the trust. I hope that helps.
That's great. There's an invitation coming your way from me. So look at your inbox.
Thank you. Oh, sorry, and the question about education. This comes back to our restorative community and our connections. Mary's nodding her head, yep, where I've actually just had some beautiful emails in the last week. We've got a couple of people in the education system, but I think we've got a new dawn. It depends on people in positions of power and different influences. So this goes back to how do we work together as a restorative community with all the different viewpoints, and then I think we're getting some movement there. We've also got some fabulous people in our Faculty of Faculty of Education. Wonderful assistant professor who's a First Nations scholar, and we've teamed up. We've got a plot. But we need to do a lot more in Canberra on education. Mary's nodding.
It's like I've just arrived in 2022. I can't find my mute button. I wanted to give a chance for anyone just before we close. I promised that as I asked people to do this early in the morning before they teach, or late in the evening as they're coming home for dinner, that I would end on time, because those around me know I would happily have you all just talk and meet and discuss these issues all night. But I'm not allowed to do that. So I just wanted to give you one last chance. If there's anyone who has a burning comment about something that was really is sticking with them as they go, or a question that they had, or a place this resonates with your work, I'll sort of pause and invite that before I have a few closing comments. Awesome. Okay, so I stopped, I paused, I waited. So I want to thank you, Holly, so much for taking the time to be with us tonight, but also, of course, for starting us off so well in this seminar series, the first of many to come. And the group of fellows and associates has been meeting monthly together as part of building a community of exchange and learning. And this is one of the ways to include more and more people into the invitation of conversation together with us as part of building this broader international learning community. So can't think of a better way to start that than to be able to hear from you about your work, about the community that you are a part of, that is flourishing and working hard to imagine, along with the rest of us, and often ahead of the rest of us, what does a restorative community require of us? What might it offer to us? And what is the hope of it that we can all be inspired and strive towards? And how do we build the connective tissue so that web of relationships where there are nodes of that hope can find and hold us together as we think about this work of challenging work of change and of building these kinds of communities around the world. So a wonderful way to start this series, and has been wonderful having you as our inaugural international fellow. We are going to have the opportunity to come back together for 2 further lectures. So if you have the chance to check in on people you think should have been here tonight, or you think will have an interest in connecting with this community and being part of the conversation, please encourage people to join us. You can find the link for them to register on our website, restorativelab.ca. And so on May 9th, I'm pretty sure that's right. Yep, on May 9th is our next lecture, and Daniel Dalgobo, who's was with us tonight, as well as one of the fellows and associates, part of the Fellows and Associates program, is going to be sharing some of his significant and important groundbreaking work, thinking about a restorative approach in the context of campus sexual violence. And then on May 30th, Alexa Dodge, as also an associate of the lab, is going to be sharing some of the really important research that she's been doing, and then work in the world to think about how we address a non-consensual pornography through a restorative approach to address that harm. And so excited to have the chance to welcome you all back to be part of that conversation, and to hear more about their research and work. And so I'm looking forward to seeing all of you back. If you have any questions about the lecture series, or suggestions for things that you'd like to hear more about, we're always happy to hear about that too. So you can reach us through the website. And thanks so much for spending the time together as part of this learning community tonight. Thanks very much, Holly. Thanks, everyone. Good night. So you can stop the recording, Catherine, for us.